Hi folks, welcome to another Vault episode of Unsung Podcast. This has been a fun little adventure so far, going back and re-listening to these episodes and reappraising them. It's been a chance to exorcise some demons regarding doubts and concerns about old episodes. I think we'll probably use it for that in the future as well. I know Mark has a couple on his conscience. But it's also really nice to revisit episodes that I really enjoyed. We do so much digging in these artists that sometimes it's easy to forget stuff. And I remember when we covered the artist Lubomyr Melnyk, there was so much that came out of that episode that I wish had stuck in my head better. So I went back to it. And this is actually the condensing of two episodes, episode 126 and episode 127, into one for these purposes. There was quite a lot. This was at a time when we still did the Nexus, clearly. This was back in 2020. And so I've cut that out of this because, well, we'll maybe do a Nexus compendium in future anyway, but it's quite a long listen and I think it's more worthwhile to try and keep the facts in our brain rather than some of the nonsense that we tack on at the end. You may remember there was other things going on in 2020. So this went out 4 months into lockdown of the pandemic. This was mid to late June. You'll certainly notice the quality of Mark's microphone in this. Not going to lie, we were still trying to get to grips with recording the shows remotely. We hadn't quite invested in the right gear, so it was a little bit patchwork because obviously lockdown kind of sprang up on us. I also think the lockdown's relevant in regards to what we talk about in this show. You'll hear me in particular get a little bit heated about the notion of anti-vaxxers. I won't relitigate that here. You'll hear it in due course. But as I say, this was only a few months into that ordeal. And the definite end of lockdown, I guess, is a bit of a grey area. But suffice to say, it went on for a lot longer than 3 months. And a lot of people were affected by that. And so going back to the episode now, I think the frustrations around the rhetoric that Lubomyr comes out with from a very left-wing kind of hippie perspective, the kind of irritation was still fresh at that time. What I'm really struck with now is that it's more of a fatigue because it just got so boring hearing this bullshit. At first, you kind of almost thought that maybe people just need to be shouted at until they understand the facts. And it really took time and wasted energy, months, years of wasted energy of spinning our wheels to realise that there was something more going on. And that people weren't suddenly just going to realise that they were wrong about these vaccines. That the psychology of that was much more complicated. If you're listening to this and you don't agree with me in that subject, then I guess I'm surprised you're listening to this in the first place, but maybe you've just been browsing for Lubomyr Melnyk and you've come across us. If you're up to the challenge, listen through, see what you think. If you still think we're full of shit at the end and that 5G is talking to microchips that were injected into you to control the stock market, then fair enough. But I think now, looking back in it, there's a weariness, and I have not listened to Lubomyr the same since. I think I did initially after the show. I was quite engaged with them. But the longer it went on, people like him became maybe a bit of a focal point for my frustrations at the disinformation. On that subject, it's quite interesting because this also went out 2 years before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Now, let's be clear, the Russians invaded Ukraine in 2014, the little green men, the unmarked soldiers and vehicles, but the full-scale invasion kicked off in 2022, as we know, and Lubomyr is Ukrainian. It's his nationality, by birth anyway. He was born in Munich, but his family are Ukrainian. He's quite outspoken on it. He's been quite outspoken on the war. I mean, frankly, he's done some interviews that are pretty contentious, and in it he talks about disinformation, about how dangerous it can be, which raises a wry smile. He actually likens Putin to Satan. Not figuratively, but I think quite literally. I think he believes that Vladimir Putin is Satan. There's a quote I came across that says, "No human is clever enough to control the world like Putin does. Only Satan can pull that off." And he doubles down on that many, many times. But yeah, so it's interesting. I have a lot of sympathy for him. I have a lot of sympathy for anyone from Ukraine in light of what's been done to their country. But I think he just confirms his status as a very frustrating figure for me, because there are so many things about him, not least his genius and the beauty of his music, and the fact that he does seem quite a gentle soul. And yet there's so much about him in terms of his beliefs and the way he sees the world that I find extremely alienating. So ultimately, it was an interesting listen. I don't know if I could say that I like him any more or less than I did, but I'm definitely kind of bored of the bullshit. And as much as the music is really quite timeless, the bullshit is very, very old. Have a listen, see what you think. I really enjoyed the episode. And yeah, I think if you like anything neoclassical, post-rock, anything like that, in fact, even friends that are into mathy music have told me they really, really enjoyed this guy. So give him a chance, and you're forearmed with a bit of insight into where he's coming from, and you can make up your mind on that basis. Enjoy the show. If you like the show, please consider subscribing. Patreon, Unsung Pod on all the socials, and we'll see you soon.
Hey folks, that's my Mark Maron intro. Hey folks!
Hey folks!
But a lot more American and a bit more whiny. Welcome to the Unsung Podcast. We're joined with our usual crew here. How are we all doing?
Alright, thank you.
Mark, you've almost got big hair, inverted commas.
My head is so big it looks like a hat.
It is pretty vast. Your hair just looks like your hair, Chris.
Yeah. I mean, it's getting pretty long, and I can put it back now.
I've been going for a mullet.
So, yeah, you've shaved above the ears, let it go in at the back. It's that brassic look, isn't it?
That's the vibe, yeah.
I'm taking it.
What were you feeling this week?
White guilt. Is that what we were all feeling? White guilt.
I don't want to be the guy who said it, but it's definitely true.
All guilt matters.
Our JDL episodes seem to be unfortunately timed, or fortunately timed, depending on how you want to look at it.
Quite the opposite, yeah. I'd say it was well timed.
But through very unfortunate circumstances, and it's been an eye-opening week. I'm pretty sure, an eye-opening couple of weeks I'm pretty sure everyone.
Yeah, it's probably not been that eye-opening for people of colour.
People who listen to this podcast, I think, fairly sure are mostly white.
People who host this podcast who are almost entirely white.
Yeah, almost entirely white.
I think what seemed the most appropriate thing to do, and it's another happy coincidence, is that after 2 weeks of platforming an exceptional and I would say revolutionary black artist, we can make up for that for our alt-right contingent by covering an old white conspiracy theorist guy.
Yes.
I mean, his opinion truly counts,
and it's not heard enough.
Yeah.
So this week we're going to cover an artist called Lubomyr Melnyk. A Ukrainian, well, he claims Ukrainian, I'll mention that in a minute, a pianist, and, well, I mean, kind of a savant, really. The guy's pretty exceptional. I've been really wanting to cover this for a long time. I mentioned it a wee bit in the Apocalypse mixtape that we did, but there's, as I'm sure you guys have discovered, there's so much to say about him, beyond even just his music. He's a pretty astonishing character. And there's a lot to get through as well, so I don't want to dilly-dally by talking too much about what we were watching on TV. I mean, if you saw anything great, speak up. I watched Left Behind last night, the crazy quasi-Christian fundamentalist film about the rapture. That was garbage.
Yeah, that is garbage. I seen Waterworld. I watched Waterworld in a Netflix party with a couple of my friends.
Underrated.
Waterworld was wrongly defiled by critics at the time.
I think so. I mean,
defiled as opposed to defamed.
A bit of both.
Don't get me wrong, some of the dialogue is fucking shocking and it's got a really humming ending as well, but the production design's amazing and Dennis Hopper is utterly superb in it, just chewing all the scenery, all the expensive scenery.
It also begins with Kevin Costner drinking his own piss, which all movies should really start.
I think I saw maybe his first movie the other last night as well. I watched a kind of nuclear apocalypse film called Testament from 1982, maybe to 1983. Pretty bleak stuff, I have to be honest. Really bleak stuff, in fact. I
downloaded a late 80s Costner called No Way Out last night, which I'm going to watch. That's a great
legendary
movie. Yeah,
it's good film.
Honestly, I've walked in on my dad watching that film maybe 20 times. One of those. It's a dad movie, Dave.
It's a proper dad movie. I remember it when I was wee, and my dad loved it. It's
Line
like
of Fire and that.
Yeah, A Few Good Men.
Oh, I love that film. Talking about not being able to handle the truth, Lubomyr Melnyk.
Aye. So who is this big lad? Big beefy hairy lad.
That is a quality transition. Come on.
I did enjoy that.
Yeah, it was good. It was good.
Okay, so we'll set the scene with this guy. I've tried to structure my notes here, but I mean, as you can probably see from what I'm going to hold up to the camera, that's a jungle.
It's like his
jungle
brain.
Awards. So just kind of go through a wee bit of the backdrop to this guy. We're going to focus on the album Corollaries from 2013. To date, I believe Lubomyr Melnyk has composed 120 different pieces, and I mean, you're talking about, I don't know, some of these are 20 minutes long, and given that the guy holds a world record for the most notes played in a second, I would absolutely dread to try and work out the number of notes that he has committed to memory. There's something not right about me. He's like definitely some form of Rain Man. Uncut magazine actually referred to him as a Rasputin-esque poster boy for the post-classical scene.
Yeah.
He started in the 70s, really, in his career, playing in Paris, but he isn't from Paris. He was actually born in Munich, in Germany. I didn't know that. I thought he was just out and out Ukrainian, but he was born to Ukrainian parents in Munich, and he's always claimed like Ukrainian identity. That's where he really feels as his home, his spiritual home, which I think is a word that's kind of appropriate to him. And he moved to Canada. I think it was Winnipeg,
where Venetian Snares is also from. So something about that place.
I'm sure they're buds, and he spent a lot of time there. But as I say, he then ended up in Paris, working in the Paris Opera, I believe, and he was sort of playing for modern dance. He was accompanying modern dance classes with a woman called Caroline Carlson, who was, I mean, if that's your field, I'm sure you're like, oh yeah, know her. I'd never heard of her, but that's just
he was also a janitor there too.
Hey, we've all done a wee bit to make ends meet, like us right now.
Yeah.
Really interesting dude though. When he was at college university in Canada, he studied music, which is pretty obvious, but he also studied philosophy and Latin, and certainly the philosophy aspect of it will go on to inform a fair amount of his music and his outlook on life, but also a lot of his comments later in life, for better and worse, I think. In 1985, in Sweden, Lubomyr Melnyk was filmed as part of an attempt at 2 world records, I believe. He got both. The first one is that he played, I think what's calculated as 19.5 notes per second per hand.
It's
per second,
crazy.
per hand.
That's quite a lot of notes, really.
Absolutely mind-blowing.
Puts Dragon Force to shame.
And a lot of people will be like, that it's actually not possible. I've actually said it to a couple of people recently. They were like, it's not possible. Well, I'll go into it a wee bit more detail. It is possible, and it's been done because he was filmed doing it. I don't know if they slowed down the footage to count it or something like that. Anyway, he also got the record for doing between 13 and 14 notes per second for per hand for 1 solid hour as well. And so when I say that this guy's done 120 pieces of music, some of them up to like 20 odd minutes each, just the sheer number of the points of information, points of data that are in his brain are absolutely staggering. And I really don't think he's a particularly normal guy. There's some really, really extreme about him in a lot of ways, which when we talk about his personality, that'll maybe come into focus a wee bit more. I mean, it's, to be perfectly frank, I think I maybe mentioned this to you guys in a private message, but when I found myself today Googling Cossack sorcerers, I knew that this was definitely going to be an unconventional episode. But that whole thing about playing 19.5 notes per second per hand, he compares the style to a martial art. And I kind of get this, so I kind of looked into this a wee bit.
We should mention that he has named his style, his genre, as continuous music.
Exactly, yes.
He seems to be the only exponent of living music, and he likes to... his music may sound minimalist or post-classical or neoclassical, but he describes it as continuous music.
Yeah, so
both from a performance and structural perspective.
This was not something that he claims that he set out to try and develop, but it's something that sort of took hold of him as he was growing as a pianist and as a performer and a composer. I think the first album mentions in a continuous piano in the continuous form, I think is how they put it. But this just became, he started calling it continuous music, and as Dave says, he's the only person that he feels plays continuous music. He says classical music is distinctly different. It's all to do with the fluidity of movement. He actually, I think he touched on that Bruce Lee quote, be as water, and it's all to do with the complete relaxation of your body. I mean, classical pianists, as I was saying earlier on, that, you know, it sounds mad that it would be 19.5 notes per second per hand, but classical pianists, good ones, can get to about 13 or 14 notes per second. Not for long periods of time, but they can do it. And this guy has just been training for nothing but this for a long, long time. When he talks about his hands during the process, he talks about changing steel rods into clouds of water. In the days when he was really training up for it, he would find that after he'd been playing, he couldn't lift a cup because there was no strength. His hands were so relaxed. He had to get them into such a condition where they were completely fluid and there was no resistance that he had to wait for them to kind of go back to normal. Like the movement of each finger as well sort of aids the next finger. So it's such a fast and precise action that the angle of one finger will set the root for the next finger. The weight of that finger will pull the next finger. It's so incredibly precise and fast. It's a very, very hard thing to try and get your head around. And to give you some comparison as well, the world record for typing the alphabet, including a space between all the letters, so that's 51 keystrokes, is 3.4 seconds, which means that Lubomyr Melnyk's almost 3 times faster than that on a piano, given that a piano has weighted keys and that the keys are much, further apart. I mean, the guy has taken this to an extreme that I think is really, really difficult to kind of comprehend in normal parameters. As I said, he compares that to a sort of form of martial art. There's a great quote where he describes it in reference to Kung Fu, Tai Chi and Cossack magic, which is how I ended up Googling Cossack sorcerers. I found out some pretty interesting shit about Cossack magic, and I've got a little brief game for you guys here, right? Cossack magic and Cossack sorcery is basically a Ukrainian martial art of sorcery, apparently, and he says that it perhaps even succeeded Shaolin monks or Japanese ninjas in terms of the skill level, right? In fact, no, I took that quote from ancientorigins.net. Feel free to go and have a look. I think they were known as the Zaporizhian army. I don't know how to pronounce that, but they were around about the 1600s in like Poland and southern Ukraine, and different areas of kind of Eastern Europe, and they had special skills, it turns out. Now I think what would be good is if we ranked these special skills out of 10.
Yeah, I'm totally into that.
Okay, so special skill number 1, guys, is to find and hide treasures.
I mean, it's basic, but
Gotta be number 2, right?
I think that's pretty weak. I gave that a 3. To find and to hide treasures is not that's not a level of mysticism or sorcery.
No, I wouldn't have said
Find, though.
to find.
Yeah, I mean that's okay, but to withstand hot rods.
Depends how long and how hot.
I think I thought it was a little bit better. I gave that a 5. No, I mean,
yeah,
at least it's something. You could.
At least it's a physical thing that you're proving to other people.
Put it this way: if you were in the pub and you'd had a few, you could show off to the table by withstanding some hot rods.
Can I just interject there? I was in Glasgow's finest establishment Broadcast about 3 years ago, I think, and these guys came in and sat next to us. There was about 8 people at this table, and they were pretty pissed. One of them used to be in a unnamed Glasgow hardcore band, but anyway, they said, "Oh, this is my mate. He can break spanners in half." And we were all like, okay, cool, that's fun.
Hot spanners?
No, just spanners. And then he was like, we were like fairly nonplussed. But then he's like, I've got a bag, and he brought out a bag of small spanners, and then he just started snapping them in half at the pub. And I really wanted him to go away, but yeah, there you go.
I
wonder if he was a Ukrainian Cossack sorcerer.
Jesus Christ, he could have been.
Yeah.
I mean, I heard they do tend to go to Broadcast.
Well, exactly. It's got the vibe.
So the next skill that was on the list was change the weather. So that was pretty good.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I would give that a 9.
Yeah, that is good. I mean, science...
Especially if you live in Eastern Europe, get a bit drizzly.
Yeah, I mean, the Chinese government can now do that. They did that for the Olympics, I think. So it is scientifically possible. So, but, I'll give it an 8.
All right, this one, open castle doors with their bare hands. I mean, that's just opening a door, right? I mean,
yeah, I was just going to say this. Yeah,
yeah, I know it's a big door, but
it's got a handle. You use your bare hands to open the door. In any case, I would have imagined, unless it's like an automatic door, and I don't imagine they had those in the 16th century Ukraine.
Yeah, I'm giving that a 1.
Yeah, I give it a 0. I think 1's generous. This one confused me. I gave this a question mark out of 10. Float on the floor in boats as if on the sea.
Yep. I don't know what that means.
Float on the floor in boats as if on the sea. Does that mean just put a boat on the ground and sit in it and pretend you're in the sea?
I don't really know. Does it mean like submerge yourself half in a solid floor? I don't know. I'm unsure about that one.
I put it this way: I don't think you'd catch a Shaolin monk doing that kind of shit. But
no. Definitely not.
This was good. Cross rivers on drugs.
On drugs?
On drugs.
I thought you said on drugs. I was like, hey, I've done that.
Cross rivers on rugs.
Yeah, that's all right. I mean, you could, like, a good sorcerer would just cross river on feet. just walk over water. That's what Jesus, the OG sorcerer, did. So
lazy Jesus, 420 Jesus. Teleport, 10 out of 10. Thought that was a good one.
Oh, I mean, yeah, full sci-fi marks for that one.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I didn't get this one. New psychotherapy. I mean, that is genuinely down there. New psychotherapy.
It was old psychotherapy, so we can't make a comparison to actually know if it's any good or not.
No. New with a K. New psychotherapy.
All right. That's a shrug out of 10.
They're ahead of their time, though.
Well, yeah. Well, when was this?
This is like 1600s, man. So I mean, this is well before Freud.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, no trepanning there or anything. So
going up to the king. Do you fancy her ma? And this one's not bad, although they weren't specific. So they could apparently catch a bullet. So that's potentially like an 8 or a 9 out of 10, except they didn't make it clear with what. So like with her face, in which case that's a 0 out of 10.
Yeah, and if it also depends if the bullet had been fired or if it was just fallen off a shelf.
I never even thought about that. That could be in the fine print. Yeah, bullet can't be fired.
Yeah, bullet must be toppled from a higher surface.
I mean, it turns out that other than teleporting and changing the weather, I can do everything that a 1600s Zaporizhian Cossack sorcerer can do.
Plus, you have a kettle. You didn't have a kettle.
Totally. So anyway, the art of going back to Lubomyr Melnyk from the weird Eastern European monk guys. The style of Lubomyr Melnyk often sounds like what you call an arpeggiator. He's like a human arpeggiator.
Yeah.
Did you guys get that from what you heard?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can play a lot of notes. You can play 5 notes on the piano in a oneer, basically, because you just you play a chord and you slightly delay your tapping. Yeah, so there's a lot of chords and arpeggiating and stuff like that. But it is incredibly complex. I suppose we should, before we go into the actual sound of the music and stuff like that, somebody will say, just because he can play a lot of notes doesn't mean that he should. You talk about Yngwie Malmsteen. Just because he's really fast at guitar doesn't mean that the music is going to be beautiful. But Lubomyr then goes beyond just technicalities and.
Well, that's interesting because that actually kind of quite effortlessly in an entirely unrehearsed manner leads me on to my next point, which is why does he play that many notes? And this whole notion of continuous music, it's not just about, in fact, it's actually very little to do with the specific notes in the sense of like a traditional melody or a line or the sort of annotated music you would see a pianist playing normally. He's not really necessarily concerned with a particular pattern of notes that creates like a nice little tune that you can sort of identify and sing. He's first and foremost, he's trying to sweep those notes up into something that's kind of an aggregate. So it's sort of like pointillism, where you step back from the paintings that were done with tiny little dots, or like a magic eye even, I think is probably even a better example. He's trying to get you to step back from that, not to see the tiny little patterns and little incremental things that constitute that, but to look through those patterns and see the song that lies beyond. By the way, for the life of me, I have never seen a fucking magic eye picture, and I think you're all just making that shit up. But I'm going to use it as an example. But yeah, that's maybe a better analogy for it, is that he's trying to get you to look through the individual notes. That's not what he wants you to focus on. I mean, he gets really, really deep into his descriptions of that. But a big part of it is to do with the resonance and the harmonics that come off that. So the harmonics are not necessarily the note you're playing. So if you're playing a C, that's fine. But there'll be certain aspects of the string, the instrument itself, the room, that will in some way modulate qualities of that sound, and you'll find that other notes appear in very subtle ways. So if you're ever mixing records, you can actually hear when somebody's struck a chord, but you can sort of hear a complementary note in the background. You're like, where's that coming from? And it's maybe the resonance of the guitar itself, it's maybe the resonance of the piano itself, it's maybe something else in the room vibrating because of that sound. But it's a very interesting phenomenon, and as a result, Lubomyr Melnyk's pieces tend to be written for specific instruments, and I don't mean like pianos, guitars, I mean like specific pianos, specific instruments, because as he says, no two pianos are the same. The right down to the finest detail of the grains in the wood, their construct, whether they were made by the same person from the same wood, from the same tree, it doesn't matter. There will still be so many tiny differences that will all have a cumulative effect in terms of changing the sound that you're hearing, and in terms of changing the sounds that you're hearing that aren't even necessarily the main sound being played. And I do get that. I really do get that. I mean, it's the reason that some people are absolutely in love with certain guitars. It's the reason that some people are in love with certain rooms, certain venues. I remember, like, a lot of people love the Barras in Glasgow, and there's a resonant quality to that room that doesn't exist in other rooms. So the same song in there will sound better than others. I mean, LCD Sound System, your favourite, Dave, that's his favourite venue. Nick Cave, that's his favourite venue, and that's a lot. It's not just to do with the experience and the look of the room and the proximity of the crowd. It's to do with the sound.
Do you know,
the music?
Funnily enough, going back to broadcast, I actually saw Liturgy, the New York post-hipster black metal band, in broadcast.
Good description.
I mean, first of all, their incredibly white lead guy, Hunt Hendricks, he talks about, like, his philosophy and his, like, he's sort of got an infamous manifesto called Transcendental Black Metal, where he talks about sonic aura washing over you that's, you know, beyond the main notes. And funnily enough, when I saw Liturgy, the best thing about them was that sort of sense of losing yourself and hearing the sounds bouncing off, and like the weird little scrapes and things like that are coming through the amps at really high frequencies that aren't on the record and might not happen in other rooms, but by happy accident worked. And they get slagged off a lot, and they are truly pretentious, but I really enjoyed that gig from a very sonic perspective, which is interesting.
No, absolutely. And I think there's few things more exciting than going and seeing an artist who does take those kind of creative chances. That's something that's certainly been drained out of a lot of music now. It's very easily reproduced. You get a lot of bands that will bands inverted commas that will sound check simply by sending a USB stick ahead of them and getting it plugged out through the PA, because they want that sound to be almost identical at every single venue.
Yep.
Then you get people the opposite end of that spectrum, like Lubomyr Melnyk, who is completely all about acoustic music. And I don't mean acoustic like guitars, I mean acoustic as in he wants you to hear it in a room, in person, and all the imperfections and all the changes and all the variations that are available to you, so that every performance is different. And that quality can make for some of the most truly, like, astonishingly affecting things you'll ever see, where there is that element of chaos, of unpredictability, where something can just take a good song and push it over the top to be an incredible song, whether it's you just so happen to get the perfect spot in the room where the reverb is beautiful or the venue itself is really good. There's so many different ingredients, and Lubomyr Melnyk, even just in the context of a single piano, really embraces that. He also is at pains to say that he doesn't really like playing in concert halls or like sort of like sound dampened theatres. To him, that's very counterintuitive. What he sees as being the optimum gig is in, he actually mentioned factories, he mentioned a church, cathedral,
art galleries.
Yeah, art galleries. I think he also mentioned castles at one point. Just places with really unpredictable and irregular acoustic spaces. And the other ingredient he also includes in that is that in his ideal scenario, the audience would be mobile. While he's playing, the audience would be able to explore the space of the room as he's performing, to hear different versions of these songs from different vantage points, to go up here, to go down there, to hear the reverb when they stand next to a wall, to go into the centre of the room and hear it quite balanced. All these very, very subtle but significant, you know, if you're attuned to it, significant.
There's a really good sound art programmer in Glasgow called Cryptic, and they do quite a lot of interesting, like, sort of sound installations and stuff like that with very experimental performers. And quite often it is about finding the space in the room and finding the differences, and, you know, and letting the audience explore. And it's interesting that he also, I read in one of the interviews with him that he doesn't know how he would manage it technologically, but the idea of having speakers that move around really quickly.
Did you read that? It's crazy.
Yeah.
He wants the speakers to spin round the audience.
Yeah. So that
ties into his notion that he's sitting within a hurricane of music when he's playing. Like, he feels that he's sort of, it's a very transcendental moment for him, and when all those acoustic qualities are mixing, when all the harmonics and the reverberations of the room and the floor and the piano, he says he really feels like he's in the midst of something, and to him time slows down. It's a very, very intense and sort of out of body experience for him, and that whole notion of the speakers spinning around the room, which is a fantastic thing just to imagine, that's to do with him trying to somehow use technology to replicate that experience for the audience and overwhelm them somewhat, because he says his music is all about him being overwhelmed by its performance. It channels through him rather than him composing it.
It's also a very mystic approach as well, right?
He's got a very mystic approach to life in general. Just to, in terms of his technical approach, just one other thing that he does quite a lot is that he performs on two pianos. For certain periods of his career, he's done that, certain albums, and it allows him to sort of mirror and get kind of contrapuntal in certain melodies using the same area of the keyboard. Now, Dave mentioned some of his interviews. His interviews are fascinating reading because Lubomyr Melnyk, if you watch videos of him, he comes across as an incredibly amiable guy. And anecdotally, I've heard nothing but nice things about him in person. Like, he's meant to be lovely, and he seems lovely. And I've seen him, and that's actually going to inform a later part of this. But on the flip of that, in his interviews, on paper, he just seems so arrogant, like so incredibly pretentious and arrogant, and to sort of, and now I want to qualify that. I'm not saying that he definitely is, but that it's a hard thing to get your head around. So, for example, he says that in history there's a hierarchy of pianists. There are three kind of major musical divisions that exist currently. One of them is rock jazz, which he describes as slam bang playing, and he acknowledges that some people are fantastic at it, but he says that's the sort of bottom level of piano playing. Then there's classical, where the player is a slave of the piano. The player has to play the music, and he has to hope that the piano allows him to play the music in the way that he wants it to come across. And then there's continuous music. Now, bearing in mind that he's the only one that can play continuous music, that means he is the top of the hierarchy of pianists in the entire world that exist. He has said things like, nobody in history can do what I do. I mean, he's not shy. He's also described the difference between classical and in classical, the player is the slave of the piano. He says in continuous music, the piano is your lover, the piano is your slave, the piano is your glorious angelic friend. And he says things like, the touch on the keys is like being God and letting it rain. The keys release gentle birds that fly off into space, totally weightless, cloud-like, that disappear. And it's a really odd balance to strike, because I can't emphasise how nice he seems when you see him talking. He just seems, and he's very approachable, he's very open to doing interviews and things, but what he comes out with are really quite obnoxious at times.
Totally, yeah.
I mean, he got a lot of criticism for saying that, and it's sort of misquoted, and it's hard to really get to the bottom of it. Claims that continuous music was the only real seismic change in the piano or music of the last 300 years. Now, clearly, that is a big claim. He also said things like Scarlatti plays the piano the same as Rachmaninoff did years later. The sort of sense being that they were all variations on a theme, where they were playing music using this device rather than unifying themselves with the device to create a form of music that can't be replicated, as I said. And I get that conceptually. It is a significant distinction. It's very arrogant, really. I guess there's no real way to dress it up, but I mean, he does say that's not to diminish how fantastic he thinks classical music is. He says there's dozens of examples of truly mind-blowing classical musicians and pianists, although he does also say that there have been no masters born after 1913. I'm not sure who he's referring to, because I look back at 1913 and that's, I don't know, it's like Britain and people like that were born then, so I'm not really sure who he was getting at with that.
He also says himself a master as well, though. Like, that's the thing. Like, he says there's been no masters on piano, and then he considers himself one as well, like in the Beethoven, Mozart sense of the word.
Yeah.
Like, he considers himself to be right up there.
He also has, there's like a weird twist in the arrogance where he sort of, he refutes it. I mean, he actually said, I do not personally boast. God gave me this possibility. It's not me who did it. So that arrogance acquires like a quality of, it's boastfulness, but it's not boastfulness about his ability. It's boastfulness about the art that he feels he is channeling. Like, he feels he's channeling something that's of a level that no one else has ever done. But
it's mysticism again, right?
Well, yeah, so again, that kind of smoothly brings us on to the next part of this guy that you can't really ignore, which is his beliefs, right? And his beliefs for me are, I would say, highly problematic in places. They're sometimes just a little bit of an eye roll, but other times they're a lot to swallow. And as I said, I've seen him live, and I knew he had some interesting ideas, because it is kind of, Mark, I think you were the same as me, that you struggled initially to uncover some of the more kind of extreme opinions that he put across, didn't you? And I'd just sort of been tipped off to it, and I don't even know where, but then I went to see him expecting him to be a slightly kooky sort of, I know he's quite a left-wing, kind of very liberal-minded kind of guy, and I expected sort of some of the cliches, that kind of hippie-ish cliche, and as you said, he probably did loads of acid or whatever in Paris in the 70s. But what I saw when I went to see him, it was at a place called Platform in Glasgow, was a really quite off-putting, like really quite off-putting, to the point where I wasn't sure if I was going to heckle or just walk out. It's difficult sometimes to separate the art from the artist, and I'm used to having that conversation more in the black metal episodes, or a conversation about David Bowie or Iggy Pop or Led Zeppelin or Kiss, where you're talking about some lecherous dirtbag that was like trying to pull underage groupies or whatever. It's strange to have it in the context of somebody that is so right on and spiritually minded and extremely liberal that they're actually off the scale in terms of normality. I mean, and Mark, I kind of made a kind of flippant comment to you about, tell me a great pianist that isn't a little bit insane. But actually, the more I thought about it after I said that, I was like, there's an incredible correlation between the greatest pianists of all time and severe mental illness.
Not just pianists, I think a lot of artists who are on that level.
Absolutely.
Sure.
But I think for some reason in that world in particular, there's a level of eccentricity that accompanies that element of being a savant. That this guy, it seems to apply to this guy in particular. So he's vehemently anti-science, and just to throw a couple of quotes up, he describes the great science attack of the 1900s. The emperor of science has no clothes. He says things like, how do you explain sound passing over a wall and shooting down to my ear at 90 degrees as it cannot possibly pass through the wall? Which is just such it's laughable, except this is a really gifted and intelligent man that's saying that. He talks about science's idiotic explanations that people dare not question. And I think the first thing that occurs to me, and the thing I struggled to bite my tongue with at the show, was there is a group of people that question that, and they're called scientists. And that's what science is. Yeah, that's what science is. Science is not a religion. Science is a method, which is challenging suppositions and looking for answers. And then if you don't see evidence of it, discarding them. And then maybe someone comes along and challenges you discarding it, and maybe someone comes along and challenges your conclusions. That's science. Science is a process. His sort of mischaracterization of it as a set of like beliefs and some kind of structure of control is so perverse and such a straw man argument, and I found it deeply offensive watching him live, to see him say things like that. Some of them were really quite laughable. He was talking about, he's commented that pianos are living beings, and I'll grant you that that's a very metaphorical thing, and it's very poetic, and in the sense of somebody with his abilities, that's fine. I can totally look away from that. But he talks about windmills, and he's got an album called Windmills, and he went at length to tell us, I'm not telling you that they're metaphorically alive. They're alive. We just don't understand that they're alive, but they are alive. Then he talked about rocks being alive, and it got really quite awkward in the room. I was like, I mean, he was it's not a metaphor. I'm telling you, they're alive. We're just too stupid. We don't understand it. It's like a dimension that we can't see, but they are alive. They exist, and they are alive. I mean, I can't really get across. This is something that deeply troubles me anyway. I mean, you guys might have picked up that I've been trolling a 5G
you've got spare time while on furlough.
Facebook group for a few weeks since I've been on furlough. This 5G conspiracy theory Facebook group sprung up in Glasgow, and surprise, surprise, most of the accounts that set it up are from the far-flung corners of the earth, and when you reverse image search, loads of the profile pictures, they're all ripped off the internet, and makeup models from Australia and things like this. I mean, it's simply, I mean, it's proof of a lot of the allegations that were made about Russian hacking and disinformation and stuff. But unfortunately, Lubomyr Melnyk, in his own way, really aligns with a lot of that stuff, because when I saw him live, he was criticising vaccines, he was criticising modern medicine, and literally never has there been a time in modern history that it is less acceptable to criticise the merits of immunology and epidemiology and the things that are saving millions of lives this very moment as we speak. It really, really, really rubbed me up the wrong way. I mean, it rubbed me up the wrong way, and probably as much as it would have if I'd been watching someone from the far right say it. There really was no... maybe even slightly more disappointed, if I'm honest. Maybe slightly more disappointed, because I want to like him and I want to agree. And it's really, really strange to watch that unfold. Especially just now, going back over his stuff and reading what he's written. What did you guys think when you read the interviews? What was your gut reaction to it?
It's like I said in the chat, and I did read through some of them, it was like, it just strikes me as being like a pretty innocuous old dude that's just an old fucking guy that doesn't get it anymore. Like, he will have said that in a room full of people who are savvy enough to know that it's definitely bollocks. Like, he's not going to be troubling anyone with his inane opinions at any point, really. Does that make them right? No, fucking absolutely does not make it right. Like, you shouldn't be ignorant, period, right? And he's very, very, very careful not to go the full hawk in interviews. You said you've seen him live. He's very careful not to go the full way in his interviews, because he obviously has some sense of self-awareness when he realises that what he's saying isn't acceptable. And you know what? Who does that as well? Like you said, alt-right as well. They'll hold back on some of their shittier opinions until they're with their pals. You know what I mean?
I think... Yeah, you're right. He is. Like, I was surprised, having seen him live and seen how outspoken he was, that there wasn't more evidence online of that, and also that there wasn't more discussion of it. Because even the people that interview him, they don't press him on any of these things at all. Like, it's all about the music. It's all quite fawning, actually, which I thought was like a little bit distasteful. And it's one thing.
Even the guys that he's worked with, Peter Broderick and Niels Fram and folk like that are, pretty much, right on left-wing liberal folk and artists, and they're just working with him as an artist. But yeah, I can't imagine if they agree with him on much of the sort of anti-science stuff.
So there's an interesting tie-in, okay, because I mean, I get what you're saying, Mark, that you're right, that probably maybe everybody in that room that went in one ear and out the other, there were a lot of eye rolls and uncomfortable shuffling of the feet, but I don't think that's 100% rule by any means. I mean, it's one thing when he's like ranting and raving about Zeno's paradox, claiming that scientists run a mile, ignoring the fact that, like, in the 4th century BC, Aristotle already responded to shit like that. But it's different when he's going up there and sort of chipping away notions of consensus, or maybe giving a sort of sense of solidarity to the people in the audience that used to be more isolated in their beliefs. This is what I found with that 5G website, right? Is that we all know the whole phenomenon of networking and how it amplifies these kind of fringe beliefs. Used to be one or two people in any given town would sit at the end of the bar and mutter about the Jews or the lizard people or whatever the fuck it was that they were fixated on, and they would never really form that kind of critical mass where they felt comfortable enough to go out and actually say this, because everybody would be like, shut the fuck up, you weirdo. But now online networking, especially given that these communities are particularly tight, has given a false sense of consensus to these ideas. Now, David Icke is a great example of where that has worked. David Icke, when you see the vast majority of his things, he seems like this quite sort of right on, left of centre guy. He's really big in the environment. A lot of what he says about the environment makes a lot of sense, until you find out that he's also said that, Schindler's List indoctrinates children with an unchallenged version of events, and rants and raves about 5G helping spread the coronavirus. And you realise that these people with these beliefs aren't necessarily harmless. There is sorry to fall victim to Godwin's law, but ideas like fascism didn't survive purely because of foaming at the mouth frenzied fanatics. They survived because some people were like, oh well, that's kind of right, I suppose the Jews are kind of a bit annoying, and why do they have so much money, that's kind of shite. They survived because of that. And he is another example of modern medicine, what's that doing, and what's this with this, and what's this with this. And there's a thing called you've heard the QAnon, right? That whole conspiracy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's barking mad, laughable, hilarious thing, except hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people subscribe to it now in the United States, and it's retweeted by people like Donald Trump. There's a thing called the New Age to QAnon pipeline, right? And what it is one of the key recruiting tools for QAnonymous, right, is not anything to do with the right wing. It's nothing to do with like trying to get blacks out or segregation or any of that kind of junk. It's New Age people, it's anti-vaxxers, it's that kind of thing. And the problem is that seems sort of harmless and she's such a nice wee woman, her. When you go in that 5G group on Facebook, one of the things that was most disturbing was to see otherwise sort of rational, normal and even well-intentioned people disappearing down a pipeline, and you knew where they were going to resurface, and there you go, they were resurfacing, retweeting people like David Icke. Then they were going even further and they were retweeting people that we all know are despicable. And I think Lubomyr Melnyk is a perfect example of that, because he's so likeable and he's so brilliant as an artist, and yet he is contributing to a very slight gravitational pull that even if it's not pulling in you or I or even maybe anybody at that Glasgow show, it's pulling in hundreds of thousands of people. But
potentially, think about it though, like, unlike a lot of the other people you've mentioned, the one thing that he doesn't do is have a platform to voice that opinion, because he doesn't do it in interviews and he doesn't have any vocals or anything in his music, so it comes across as being quite like innocuous,
A key feature of every one of his live shows is that he introduces the shows with long spoken segments, and between songs he does minutes upon minutes of discussion between each song. For example, it was between the Windmills songs that he did this extended rant about how windmills and rocks were alive and that scientists were idiots and that we just couldn't broaden our minds enough to understand that rocks were living things. His live shows are a vehicle for that. What's quite interesting is that the level of hipness that he has acquired, which is an interesting phenomenon to me, and it's probably the only reason I listen to him, to be perfectly honest, but is because I heard of him through these kind of avenues. But this is a guy that played The Great Escape in 2015, he played Primavera in 2016, he had a residency at Cafe Otto in London, he played at the Hidden Notes Festival, because he's on this label called Erased Tapes, along with Oliver Arnolds, Niels Fram, Rival Consoles, Winged Victory for the Sullen. Like hip bands, hip artists, as Dave says, left the centre, intelligent people, and he's an intelligent person, yet he has this weird extremism to his stuff. He's also done a Boiler Room set in 2016, and these have all become platforms for his beliefs. Like, at those shows, between tracks, he was there preaching anti-science, anti-vaccine, anti-drugs. You know, that is dangerous, whether or not we like it. And what's strange is that, for example, he gets a residency at Cafe Otto, which I'm pretty sure if you asked the owners of Cafe Otto, I think the head programmer, which we actually know, he would be pretty appalled to be platforming anti-vaxxers. Yeah, he is. And that's really strange, because there's no getting away from the fact that there are people within the left-wing community that are very susceptible to this, and they can end up being drawn towards some radical conclusions further down that pipeline.
So, Christopher, why have you decided to platform him on our podcast?
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like, I actually have two questions, and that is, like, one, what would happen? How would you feel if he was deplatformed as a result of this? And two, why do you think he hasn't deplatformed by people who clearly watched his shows and then continue to put him on?
Luckily, almost like a setup, both of those questions contribute brilliantly to the justification for me doing this, because the long form format of this podcast allows me to do a good 15 to 20 minutes ranting about that and really get that out in the open to people that didn't know that. I mean, the people that first let me hear this, my mate Dave Warner, who's a fountain of great music, but Dave didn't know about this stuff to do with Lubomyr Melnyk. And so I feel by promoting the quality of his art but balancing it with the reality of what he says and what he thinks he's conveying with that art, that's something that these other places can't do. And I would say the reason he's not been deplatformed is because, frankly, they haven't checked. And if they have checked, they've written it off as being like just some harmless eccentricity, which I don't really subscribe to. I think the guy is brilliant, but I think his beliefs are very, very problematic, especially in the current climate. And it's strange to say that about what seems to be like a kindly old guy, but he is contributing to a larger picture that is costing lives. That you can't really separate the two ultimately.
Should he be deplatformed then? Do you think he should be like totally cancelled?
No, no, but now you're talking about, I mean, do deplatform Michael Jackson completely? It's the exact.
I'm asking your opinion. I don't have a horse in the race. I'm just asking what your thought is on that. I
don't think we should deplatform musicians based on those shifting sands. I think we should be aware of their history and then make a decision ourselves. So if Michael Jackson comes on in a club, I'm no longer going up to dance to it. The DJ's still got a right to play it. It's still a banging tune, but I've decided not to put my money or my body behind it. And I think it's sort of, I feel kind of similarly about this. Like as you can probably tell, I've got really mixed feelings on it. I don't have like a firm decided this is my stance, but I think we're lucky we're in a position to really communicate the ambiguity of that, and people can make up their own minds. So there'll be loads of people, I know loads of people that don't give a shit. I know loads of people that love Burzum and they hate the guy but they love the music, and that's fine. That's what they do, and they are fine with that, and that is completely, they're entitled to do that. But for the people that do like to know that kind of stuff, well, you know, we've put it out there, and maybe if more places we put it out there, and rather than fawning over them, it would people would be a little bit better informed. So, the music. 120 compositions, as I said, 24 records. He's been putting stuff out in record form at least since 1979, when he released the KMH Piano in the Continuous Mode. As I mentioned earlier on, that was the first time that continuous word really appeared, and it slowly evolved into just continuous music. That album it's quite long. It's got multiple tracks. It's much more atonal. It's got the occasional flourish of kind of protracted sweetness, but it's got a lot more dissonance, and it's actually, I think it sounds a lot, I don't want to say conventional, it's not conventional, but certainly it's got more of the kind of mixed modality of some more complicated classical music, whereas the later he gets, the sweeter he gets in terms of the key and the chord progressions. let's put it this way, if music's maths, and he talks so much about relying on the harmonics that are coming off his instruments, and the harmonics and the amplification of those different qualities and features of the different sounds. It's a mathematical thing, and it's if you want to reduce it to its simplest part, chords are like, you take the 12, you divide it by 3, you can divide it by 4, you can divide it by 2, and that's where you build up these chords that sound right. And then when you start dividing it by 5 or 7, that's when you get diminished chords and minor chords and all these sort of more complicated sounds. On this album, he has a lot more of those irregular and odd numbers appearing, and sort of like pushing a swing. Like, if you want to create a harmonic, if you're pushing the swing, you have to kind of match up with the frequency of the swing. You have to sort of complement it, whether it's pushing it halfway through, whether it's waiting until it finishes, whether it's joining it at a stage, but you're working with it. What he does, and this is a lot with the chords and the notes, is that he kind of hits that swing when it's coming back towards him, and sort of, because of that, the harmonics never really get that chance to develop, and so this record doesn't have that quality of all these other tones and things appearing the way some of the later stuff does, where everything's played a little bit sweeter. The next, I'm not going to touch on all his records. So 1983 brought out a record called Concert Requiem. I think there's a sample of it on YouTube. It's hard to get some of this stuff actually, but a track called Islands. It's got violin, I think it's violin or a cello played very high.
I think it's a violin, pretty sure it's a violin.
Yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous, that song. About 2.5 minutes into it, when the meter shifts a bit, it's a beautiful work. I find
that he's better when he's accompanied. I think he's a lot more interesting when he's accompanied.
I would agree with that, yes. A lot of the best moments have accompaniments. I don't think it's not a precondition, but certainly, after this length of a career as well, he's definitely at risk of repeating himself. Some people accuse him, and I think fairly accuse him, of sometimes being overly saccharine, especially as I mentioned about the way the harmonics have to be constructed with sympathetic notes. It sometimes leads to some very predictable and quite sweet, almost cheesy patterns. He doesn't do much at all between 1994 and 2010. The only thing I found by him was a bonus track that appeared on a record called Remnants of Man from 1985. It was reissued with a bonus track from 2001. But the guy, maybe I'm just missing something, but he really seems to have dropped off the map for 15, 16 years. And I speculated a wee bit with you, Mark, because of his eccentricity. There could be some personal aspect to that, some health aspect to that. I've no way of knowing that, but it is really, really odd that he was being very, very productive up to that point. Then he's just gone. The Remnants of Man record actually is quite nice. It's one of the ones that he does with 2 pianos, and as a result, you get this crazy mirrored effect. And I've no idea how he adds the bass notes on it, because he's playing this incredibly complex pattern, and then suddenly these bass notes appear, and it's mind blowing, really.
Did you look at Discogs? There's a whole bunch of CDRs on there that he released right from 1996 right up to 2013.
I didn't, but I think even in that context, why is he releasing CDRs? He was working with labels. I think it's an interesting period in his life that he's retreated in this way, and it made me wonder where he was. I'm kind of dancing around it a wee bit, but where he was physically located at that point.
Well, he does say in some interviews it sometimes it took him years to write Windmills. So unless he was keeping all of his good stuff, maybe the stuff he's recording, the stuff that he's just written and memorised, because that was another thing he spoke about in interviews, like this idea of like it takes him a long time to memorise these hour sets, which have got like 100,000 plus notes. Like maybe he's just been writing it, possibly, but it may also have been in a faraway place that no man can really get to without signing in.
Without signing in with bars in the windies. Yeah, I mean, that said, I know he had a daughter at least, because I saw her perform with him when I saw them. So maybe it was family time. It could well have been family time, who knows. 2010, as I say, he returned with a record called Beyond Romance. Big dirty concrete crucifix on top of a cliff in the cover, and keeping with his religiosity. There's a thinner sound to this record actually than some of the later stuff, but it is very sweet and like very romantic. The title track, Beyond Romance, which actually reappears in a later release, has some absolutely beautiful moments.
It's fantastic.
4 minutes 20 into that song. It's stunning, and it's also, I mean, the way that the song ends is absolutely hypnotic. Like, it's entrancing. It's really, it does leave you quite speechless, and that's what I mean. The guy is next level, even though he knows it. 2013, you mentioned windmills, which apparently are living beings. It's kind of fairly famous amongst his fans, that album, and I saw him play a few of the pieces live. Corollaries was 2013, and also in 2013 he released 3 solo pieces. The first 2 tracks in that I am not fussed at all about, but the third track in it is called Cloud Passade number 3. Is so beautiful. Like, really, really recommend looking that out. It's about almost 90 minutes long. Terrific. One of the other big markers in his career is the album Illyrion from 2016, which was actually on Sony, a kind of classical imprint of Sony. Very grandiose. It has, as we said, a reworked version of Beyond Romance, which is a lot darker and a bit slower, and I kind of prefer the original, if I'm honest.
I prefer that one.
Do you? Yeah, I know people are divided in that. I like the brightness. The other one is quite frantic. I don't know if he made the choice to sort of, I mean, he's commented, people have said to him, could you play faster than 19.5 notes per hand per second? And he said maybe when he was younger, he was like, but at that point the notes stopped to register, and he's like, you no longer get any quality from them, and so there's not really necessarily a point. So maybe slowing it down was, you know, a deliberate thing to try and benefit the music. There's some interesting dynamics in that album. The song Sunset almost starts like a normal track, although it then kicks into life and ends up becoming like a kind of gloomy fog of like lower register metallic string resonances. Really interesting. And Cloud number 81 also has this kind of accessibility to it, but at the same time is a little bit boring as a result, I feel. or at least to start with. And then his most recent album, Fallen Trees in 2018, didn't really make any real impression on me. For me, the standout in his career has always been Corollaries. It was one of the first ones I heard. It was a real sonic breakthrough, I think, in terms of the recording and the mixing and the mastering. It's got that balance of the warmth of Illyrian, but the brightness of Beyond Romance. It's got a really nice clarity, but as you said, it's heavily accompanied. So on this record, first and foremost, it was produced by Peter Broderick, he's an American guy. He's an indie folk kind of guy. Who's in was it Horse Feathers?
He was in Efterklang. Funnily enough, I might bring Peter Broderick to the table himself, or we might talk about Arthur Russell as well, and Peter Broderick is heavily involved with Arthur Russell's legacy. But yeah, it's interesting that Peter Broderick, who's on Erased Tapes as well, and then Niels Fram is also involved with sort of co-production and performing on this record, who's also on the Erased Tapes label. So I mean, Erased Tapes themselves are a fairly hip record label for the more esoteric indie post-classical fan.
Yeah.
What I find interesting is that he's never been part of the classical scene. He's never been part of any particular scene until round about now, when it's the indie kids that start picking up on him. Then 5 years later, it's Sony Classical finally come along. He's definitely been an outsider in all forms.
I read a really interesting thing in an interview where he talked about how he played with some classical musicians, and maybe in the 80s or maybe the 70s, and they heard him playing, and one guy was like, my god, that guy's amazing, it sounds like that's what the piano was actually made for, and somebody else was like, it sounds like this guy doesn't know what he's doing. And that was a review that stuck with him, and he spent a long time being very, very angry at classical people because they would not accept him and his style, which he thinks is the best thing ever, as being something which is like the next stage of piano, classical music.
Super interesting, because I was going to say the exact same thing, is that there was some people had admiration crossing into sort of what's the phrase, envy and inadequacy when they saw how this guy could play, and the fact that they couldn't possibly emulate it. But then there's also quite a sniffy and dismissive attitude to the sort of gimmickiness of what he's done, the fact that he has a world record, the fact that it's so sometimes quite schmaltzy, sort of played in these quite sort of standard progressions. And you read some reviews, I've read reviews of kind of festivals, but from a sort of classical magazine perspective, kind of highbrow broadsheet sort of stuff, Guardian and all that, and the reviewers are very dismissive of them. They're like, what is this tacky garbage? Somebody switched on a whole bunch of arpeggiators for 45 minutes and then we got to watch some real musicians after. And yeah, so it definitely jars with them, and maybe the bravado is a little bit of a compensation for that, the sort of striking back at the people that mock him or that kind of turn their nose up at him. But yeah, so he worked with Peter Broderick, and as Peter Broderick actually plays violin on 4 of the tracks. He plays synth on the 4th one, and he does vocals as well on the 1st track. As I said, the album was mixed by Niels Fram, and I think that partnership really works. Mark, I also put you onto a video of him playing with Niels Fram, with the two of them are accompanying each other, and there's a live artist as well. That was a really highly spoken of series of shows that they did. This kind of improvisational, I don't know, it's just a giant suite, really, isn't it? But it's something fascinating to watch. But he works with Niels Fram really well on this. There's also a guy in it called Martin Hine who plays guitar on track 4, which is interesting, and synth on track 6. The violin stuff from Broderick on this works amazingly.
Brilliant.
Yeah, Pockets of Light, the first tune, you can hear right at the very start, it's Peter saying, let's just see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that kind of sums up the attitude of this collaboration, and it's kind of a beautiful thing. Broderick had written down some lyrics and just sort of run them past Lubomyr Melnyk, and he was like, "Oh, I love those, Peter. Yeah, they're great. Just go for it." And then he just improvised the rest of it along with it. So I mean, it's a beautiful effect, really. It's a great opener, that track, because of the way it builds in. It really is like a classical sweep in, almost like the opening credits or something. Did you notice that? I mean, maybe it's a rookie mistake, but you can hear the click of one of the keys in the right speaker. One of the microphones is picked up a kind of...
Yeah, I actually like that. I really like...
I like it, yeah. I like it.
Organic thing that really gives it life.
See, they leave a lot of those. They leave a lot of those little imperfections in these records. You know, because he's playing so many notes, he often hits a wrong one, and they leave it in the records. You can hear it. I mean, he's playing so many. It's not worth going back, and he's certainly not retouching these in digital suites. You know, so I think the vocals in that one actually have a kind of Sigur Rós quality to them.
Totally.
And on the first try, when the keys don't cry.
And it's got a really beautiful gradual outro, which again is quite hypnotic. The second track in that 6-day moment is probably it's the only unaccompanied track on the record, and it has like this true, authentic, classical, dramatic sweep when it gets introduced. It's a very earnest song. I think it's quite, I don't want to say po-faced, but it takes itself very seriously. There is a little moment at about 4 minutes 50 that eases the sort of dramatic tension, where it kind of relaxes just a little bit, takes its foot off the gas, and that's a really lovely passage. And I think the decay at the end, where the song, the kind of low end of the song gradually dissipates, and it fades out about 7 minutes 45, I think it is, into this gorgeous, like, high end sort of arpeggiated outro. And you can really hear the highest keys, you know, the keys where the string is so short, it doesn't really resonate. You can really hear them like punching through.
I love the thing I loved about that song the most is that, like, it was when I realised that, like, you know, a lot of piano players, the left hand is just the bass, but like it's a totally different counter melody, and then because he's playing arpeggios so fast, you get like counterpoints within counterpoints, and it stacks up like a waterfall of notes, you know.
It's a beautiful way of putting it. Aye.
And the thing I loved about this song is like it's like, I think it, you know, if this was like 1978 when he released his first album, like he's showing off, but this one, it's like it takes a lot of restraint to be this good, this impressive, and not show off at the same time. You know, it's not grandiose, but it's like accomplished and really technical. And I think that speaks to, like, it speaks to like probably growing as an artist as well over his career, but also probably who he's working with. I think some of the interviews he was saying that it seemed like he had that, he didn't really say it, but it seemed like he had quite a lot of trepidation working with these two artists that he'd never really known much before, but who did seem to get his music, but also they wanted to improvise, to bring in other players and play with them, and he was like a bit, whoa, I don't know. And then you get this thing, and this song doesn't have that in it, but I think it speaks to the rest of the record, the gentleness of it, the beauty of it. It's just like so much poise, you know. It's
They rein him in really beautifully. Did you see the quote where he was like, "Where were you guys 30 years ago?"
Yeah.
Talking about what a positive effect he felt working with guys like that could have had in his career at an earlier stage. I think the waterfall analogy is really beautiful as well, man, because I will say, see, for the last week, strolling around, taking some long walks, Lubomyr Melnyk can put a sort of hypnotic sort of frosted glaze on any moment you're having in any day. He can completely change the feel of any situation, whether it's watching the leaves and trees or watching a stream or watching people just go about their business, watching clouds. I mean, the music really is quite transcendental in that sense. The hypnotic quality to it is just... It overrides almost anything that's going on, and it's highly recommended if you're a little bit uptight. Talking of which, the third track, A Warmer Place, is so sparse for him. Like it's totally understated. The violin, and I think it's either violin and the piano strings, or maybe one or the other. Somebody's like scraping them with a nail or a coin or something very quite brittle, and that little kind of sort of texture is a beautiful kind of asymmetrical element in this arrangement. Really delicate. It's in great contrast to the kind of frenzy of the kind of other pieces here, and you almost start to feel a little bit weightless the longer this song goes on. Now, it does pick up somewhat. There's a really beautiful, long, drawn out series of violin notes that sort of start to dictate the sort of root note of the part. They determine the shifts, and the ending of that is especially dreamlike, I think. Yeah,
I mean, like, this is going to sound pure wanky, and I do apologise, but the song, it reminded me of spring. Is that like a weird thing to say? It was kind of like, I could feel there's like a chill in the air, and you can kind of smell the grass as well, and the flowers blooming. You know, it slowly opens up and just creeps into place, and it's so colourful. There's so many colourful notes in it, which sounds like a pure strange thing to say, but you can only really understand what I mean by that if you listen to the song. And that restraint is perfect, because the way the violin kind of aches behind it is just like this. This is like an entire season captured in one song, you know. And the whole thing, I think, the beautiful thing about this record is I think every single song speaks a different season. I don't know if that's deliberate, but yeah, odd. It was an odd experience listening to this record for me.
It's a nice change of pace. I'm glad he put it in there. It's something that he's not done on some other records. They're great for a while, and then you're just like, my God, I'm just so drained listening to all these fucking notes. You know, it does become a little bit overwhelming. But I mean, true to form, Night Rail from the Sun, the fourth track, very, very busy song. This is the one with the guitar, which is an interesting extra element to it. It's also got a bit of synth. Straight out of the gate, by the way, there is a definite Moby comparison waiting to happen with this tune. You heard the song God Moving Across the Face of the Waters from the Heat soundtrack. Obviously Moby's doing it with actual arpeggiators. But yeah, the piano in this, we didn't actually mention it earlier on, but Lubomyr Melnyk, a big feature he's playing, as well as his constant use of sustain pedal to try and allow all those harmonic notes to develop and all the kind of resonance to really to do its magic. It's something that a lot of the critics and some of the more dismissive reviews pick up on. They just think it's lazy and crass, but it's slightly less used in this song. It's a little bit more muted than normal. There's it takes about a minute and a half before there's the kind of first hint of a root change in this. He's very frugal with the roots in this one, at least to begin with. The next one's not maybe until about 2 minutes 10, and then later on the sort of feedback and the blend of the synth and the guitar, it starts to become very post-rocky, this one, actually. And I know there's comparisons with some of the kind of Constellation acts. I don't see the Godspeed comparisons so much as I actually see comparisons with a band called Exhaust. who use a lot more of the droney elements in their music as well. But and the thing is, with this kind of music, when there's so many notes happening at once and you get that pointillism effect, it does almost become droney. Really, this music really does appeal to fans of drone, because even though the grain is so fine, stepping back from it has a similar kind
of, I certainly like comparing it to other minimalist composers. It doesn't actually tie to stuff like, you know, Philip Glass or Steve Reich. It is more like something like Sun or Merzbow or something like that. It's way more about the overall wash of sound rather than
some interesting names you brought up there as well, because he was a huge fan of Steve Reich and Terry Riley, but not a fan of Philip Glass. He actually felt that the work of Philip Glass, it didn't have enough respect for the need for competence on the instrument. You know, he's a big believer that musicians should be highly competent on their instrument, that there's real merit that comes from really working at stuff. He's definitely not a Sonic Youth fan, and so his idols are people like, you know, he loves Jimi Hendrix, not for the music but for the sheer effortless mastery of the instrument, and he felt that Philip Glass enabled sort of charlatans to play a wee bit too much. Not Philip Glass personally, but the people who were doing his music didn't have to be as talented to do it, and therefore it didn't really work for him. But yeah, I agree, it speaks to a kind of slightly different part of you. The fifth track, Le Miroir d'Amour, which I guess is the Mirror of Love, has this really very, very distinct from most of his canon, I would say. It's like this weeping violin led departure. Minimalist, delicate, loads of detail. There's a lot of, like, even after the violin string stops resonating, Peter's kind of kept pulling the bow across it, so you hear the squeak and the scrape. Little hints of Arvo Part actually in some of the minimalism of this one. It kind of conjured to me a sort of slightly more American frontier feel. There was something less sort of Eastern European about it. The piano does thicken up around about 3 minutes 50, something like that. The song's got some mistakes still included in it. I think it's probably the most cinematic on the record as well, albeit a bit cheesy. Also get the impression that they realised that it was getting a little bit cheesy, because what happens at the end is that the melody actually starts to decay, so that the artists keep playing but they slowly dismantle the kind of cheesiness of it. So the chords become less and less and less sympathetic with each other, and the noise becomes more of a texture than a melody. It's quite an interesting way to deconstruct the sweetness, but I'm glad they did that, because I do think it would have been a schmaltzy way to end the album if they hadn't have identified that and addressed it. Yeah,
I think there's two pianos on that. I think he's playing two pianos on that, because there's one pan to the left and one to the right, and the violin's in the centre, which is not like any other song on the records.
Could be. He does play two pianos, but he also does, with their miking of the pianos, they pay a lot of attention. You know, they'll have multiple mics on their pianos, and they'll pan the mics in the stereo image, so you'll have maybe the lower end of the scale to your left, the higher end of the scale to your right, and then you'll have like a room or a couple of room condensers that are sort of like gelling the whole mix together. So they have experimented with the miking and panning, so it could be two. I've never actually noticed that myself, but I'm a big fan of this record. As I say, highly torn on the guy himself, but every single time I put it on, I'm like, fucking hell, man, this is really beautiful. The improvised nature of this one in particular, the collaboration, I agree with you, Mark. I think generally, not always, but as a rule, he has better results working with people. Maybe they rein in some of his tendencies. but this I think is very much a sweet spot in his career, albeit we've kind of flagged up a couple of other real highs, but this is the one that lands strongest as an overall album for me. And I just think the guy, I mean, he has to be in this list. He's arrogant, yeah, but he's doing something exceptional, and he has sort of flown under the radar, whether that's because his peers are a bit derisive or a bit threatened, whether that's because it's just a bit too much for people like us, or it could be any number of things. But I think he'll be somebody that maybe acquires a little bit more infamy after his death. You know, one of those people.
I would probably go for it. I'm also torn about his general shittiness of opinions. But man, this is unsung, right? And I think he is unsung for what he is. Nobody really knows what he does, apart from a very select amount of people. Hopefully that will change, like you say, and as time goes on. I don't think we'd be doing a job right if we didn't have some caveats on this one, but I think we should probably go on.
Yeah, I'm unsure. I totally get it, but I think like on a personal level, there's just something about it that just doesn't quite click with me. And I understand that he falls in this gap between, funnily enough, it's between like two things I sort of studied when I was doing my advanced higher music. Part one was I did Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on a theme of Paganini as my composition that I studied, which is like this beautiful big romantic piano and violin concerto, and there's just some really over the top romantic piano in that. And it's very structured because it's, very, classical in its form. But I love just how beautiful and overly romantic that piece of music is. It doesn't have the structure of classical form. And then, funnily enough, when I was doing my composition piece, I used to play. Did you guys used to have Guitar Pro?
Yeah.
Where it was like a tab program on your PC that you used to be able to like tab your things. But I used that to actually write lots of music. And I remember my dad coming in and like listening to a lot of the stuff that I'd written, which was just like do lil lil. He was like, Weaver, all you're doing is this just sounds like Philip Glass. Have you been listening to lots of Philip Glass? And I was like, who's Philip Glass? And then it turned out that when I was 1 or 2, my dad used to play Glassworks by Philip Glass Ensemble to get me to sleep. It was like sort of lullaby music. And I'd never...
Can I just interject for 2 seconds, Mark? Did you pick up on the fact that David Weaver's dad calls him Weaver?
Everybody in my house calls each other Weaver. My mum and dad call each other Weaver, and then they call me Weaver, and I call them Weaver. So,
right, that
doesn't really make sense. But yeah, so it turns out that I've had Philip Glass, and in particular Glassworks, this sort of 20th century minimalist masterpiece, ingrained in my mind without even noticing. And that record is then, or like Philip Glass and then Steve Reich and Terry Riley and stuff like that, I go back to a lot now. And it's weird that this sort of, what is the sort of unique selling point of Melnyk, that it falls between like the sort of romanticism and structure of classical music and then the more the structure of minimalist stuff like that of Glass and Reich. I just wanted to go and listen to Philip Glass when I put this record on, and it's funny that he ended up slagging off Philip Glass for not pushing the performer enough, but like there's a few tracks and I think number 2 on his last album, which was Son of Parasol on Fallen Trees, pretty much is just the opening of Glassworks but in a different key. So he can play it on one piano compared to Philip Glass composing it for concerto, but to the ears that doesn't really matter. And then he's putting that out 50 years after the fact. So like I totally get it, and I understand that he's pushing the envelope, and I really wanted to be able to close my eyes and like get washed away in the way that I do like when I listen to Sun, but it's evil or whatever. But I don't know, it just didn't quite click with me. So like he's a really interesting character. I really enjoyed reading about it, and I put his music on when I went for a bath, and then it was on for 4 minutes, and then I put Philip Glass on. So yeah, that's how it's gone for me.
Okay.
But
2-1?
thank you for 2-1.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, that sort of reflects, I think, my spiritual split. I do break in favour of him purely because I love his music, but you can represent the emotional caveats that I hold.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Okay,
it's been a pleasure.
Fun, guys. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.